Welcome back to the All Sorts podcast. We love taking you on these deep dives, and today we've got a life story that it's almost like a poem itself. It's a story of incredible talent, but set against, the realities of 18th century America. We're going to be diving into the story of Phillis Wheatley, a poet in bondage.
It is a fascinating story. Even the beginning is kind of shrouded in mystery.
Yeah.
We don't know the exact details of her birth or, where exactly she was born.
Yeah.
And that's something that sadly happens a lot with enslaved people. Their stories get kind of lost, in history.
Yeah, it is truly heartbreaking. But we do have some information about her life. And, pulling from sources like Wikipedia and museum articles and historical accounts, we know that she was born around 1753 in West Africa.
Wow.
Most likely in the area that is now Gambia or Senegal.
Okay.
And then at just 7 or 8 years old, she was kidnapped and sold to a trader and then forced onto a slave ship that was named the Phillis.
Oh.
The sources we looked at painted a very grim picture of that transatlantic journey, with a quarter of the passengers dying along the way.
Yeah.
And she was then sold into a new world. She found herself in Boston, purchased by John Wheatley, a wealthy merchant.
Right.
This is where I think the story takes a turn.
Absolutely, because you have the Wheatleys who were slave owners, but they made the decision to educate Phillis, which was not common.
Yeah.
And it seems Susanna Wheatley, John's wife, she was very instrumental in this choice to educate Phillis.
Interesting.
So, the sources kind of paint her as maybe a little more progressive than her husband was.
That's really interesting to see those nuances within a family who owned slaves. And Susanna's role, I think, in Phillis's education is really something.
Right.
We're talking writing Greek, Latin classics, even astronomy and geography.
Yeah, it's remarkable when you think about how rare that kind of education was for anybody at the time, let alone a woman, and certainly not for an enslaved person.
Right.
So it really highlights the paradox of her situation, being enslaved but exposed to all of this knowledge, and it speaks to her intellectual capacity that she just absorbed it all,
Yeah.
There's actually an anecdote about her mastering the English language in just 16 months.
Wow.
Which is incredible.
That is incredible. And then by the age of 14, she writes her first poem to the University of Cambridge, Harvard in New England.
Right.
And that's the beginning of her journey as this poetic prodigy.
Exactly.
I mean, can you imagine the reactions when her poems started circulating among Boston's elite?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it was a mixture of admiration, but also disbelief.
Yeah.
Because her talent just challenged every societal norm.
Right.
That was out there. The prejudice that an enslaved African woman could possess such literary skill. I'm sure people were blown away.
Yeah, I mean, so then what happened when she tried to share this talent with the wider world? I mean, did she face roadblocks in getting her work published?
She did when she tried to publish her first collection. Poems on various subjects, religious and moral Boston publishers turned her down.
Oh, wow.
Which, kind of sadly reminds us of the barriers that she faced, even in a city where people were starting to recognize her talent.
Yeah, that's so disheartening. But knowing Phillis, I don't think she gave up, did she?
Oh, no, not at all. In 1773, she traveled to London with Nathaniel Wheatley, the son of her enslavers, and she was hoping to find a publisher there.
Okay.
And actually, it wasn't just about publishing this trip, it was also partly for her health. She was struggling with asthma at the time.
Oh, wow.
And Susanna Wheatley was really crucial in making this trip happen.
Oh, wow.
Further, proving her support of Phillis's talents.
That's great.
So did she find the support she was looking for in London?
I don't know, did she?
She did. She met some very influential figures who became her patrons.
Okay.
And one of the most notable was the Countess of Huntingdon, who actually helped fund the printing of her book.
Wow.
So it's interesting, right? You have this resistance she faced in Boston, but then this amazing support she found in London.
Yeah.
It really shows the power of perspective.
Yeah.
And how social norms can restrict, but they can also liberate.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Before we dive deeper into her time in London, can you give us an idea about the themes and influences that shaped her poetry?
Yeah, her work is full of themes of Christianity, classicism, and, some scholars even suggest hints of her African heritage. Specifically, in her use of elegies and her inspiration came from a variety of sources. Classical writers like Alexander Pope, John Milton, even the ancient poets, Homer, Horace, and Virgil.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a really remarkable range,
Yeah.
showing the depth of her education. And, now, this is where it gets really intriguing.
Right.
While her poems often praise, these prominent figures, including King George III,
Okay.
there's a really strong argument that if you look closer, there are subtle critiques of slavery woven into her verse, and even pleas for freedom.
So it wasn't just beautiful poetry. She was making a statement.
Well, that's the debate that's ongoing, as some people think she was defending slavery through a Christian lens,
Oh, yeah.
and others see it as this subtle condemnation,
Yeah.
Given her position and the time period,
Yeah.
she had to be very careful how she expressed herself.
Right. It makes you think what was going through her mind when she was writing.
Exactly. And one poem that sparks a lot of discussion is on being brought from Africa to America.
Oh, wow.
It's a poem that continues to challenge scholars today because there are so many different interpretations.
That's fascinating.
And I think we can dig into that a little bit further in part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
So listeners, stay with us as we continue to explore the life and legacy of Phillis Wheatley in the next part of our deep dive into this incredible story.
Phillis Wheatley's journey, it really makes you think about human resilience.
Yeah.
It's a story about finding your voice even when things are really tough. And, we ended part 1 talking about how her poetry might have these hidden critiques of the system that enslaved her. This idea of, a poet in bondage is so powerful.
Yeah, it really captures it. And shortly after her book was published in London, she was emancipated by the Wheatleys.
Yeah.
It signifies triumph, but also the beginning of a whole new set of challenges for her.
Right.
Finally free.
Yeah.
You would think that would be it, the start of something better, but it seems like it wasn't.
Yeah, unfortunately not, despite gaining her freedom. Phyllis's life took a lot of difficult turns after that. The Wheatley family, her patrons, they died not long after she was emancipated.
Oh, wow.
Which must have been devastating for her, losing those who had supported her talent.
Yeah, imagine the void that must have created.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it seems like she faced a lot of obstacles trying to kind of build on that success she had.
That's right. Trying to get funding for second book was really hard.
Yeah.
Back then, publishing relied a lot on subscriptions.
Right.
And societal limitations on Black women, even free Black women, made it a really big struggle for Phyllis.
Oh, wow.
It just shows how deep those limitations went even after emancipation.
Yeah, what a contrast to the support she had in London. It highlights, this ongoing struggle for recognition and equality.
Exactly. And amidst all these challenges, she married John Peters, a free Black grocer, in 1778.
Okay.
And, they really struggled. They lived in poverty, and they tragically lost 2 of their infant children.
Oh, that is so heartbreaking. It seems like one hardship after another. It makes you wonder how she kept going.
Right.
How she kept creating amidst all that.
It really speaks to her resilience. Even though she had this literary success and her freedom, she still faced so many obstacles because of the way society was structured at the time. And ultimately, to provide for her family, Phyllis had to take on work that had nothing to do with poetry.
What kind of work did she end up doing?
Sadly, she ended up working as a scullery maid.
Wow.
Which is, kind of a sad reminder that even though people were technically free, society still had ways of trapping them.
Yeah, that's really sobering. So given all these challenges, how is she remembered today? What's her lasting legacy?
Well, Phillis Wheatley, she holds such an important place in American literary history. She was the first published African-American poet and the second published female poet in America.
Yeah.
Which are monumental achievements considering the time period.
Absolutely. Those are milestones that cannot be understated.
Right. And it's incredible when you think about all the barriers she faced and the impact she had. Her legacy is really complex. Her work continues to be studied and debated by scholars today.
Yeah.
Even over 200 years after her death. And there are different ways of thinking about her poetry. Some scholars argue that she was this subtle revolutionary, using her art to critique slavery and advocate for freedom within the limits of her time.
That's really interesting. It's like she was planting these seeds of resistance, carefully crafting her words to challenge the system that held her captive.
Exactly. And it speaks to her intelligence and her awareness of, the power dynamics that were happening around her.
Right.
Then you have others who criticize her for not being more outright, abolitionist, for seemingly praising people like King George III. But you have to think about the context. It was a dangerous time to speak out against slavery.
Of course.
Especially as a Black woman who had just gained her freedom.
It makes you wonder if there were poems she wrote that were more, open about her feelings that she didn't publish.
Yeah, it's entirely possible some of her most powerful critiques of slavery are in her letters.
Right.
Not the poems she published for a wider audience. She had to be strategic.
So we may not have the full picture
of
her thoughts, but we can definitely see how she navigated this, really complex social landscape.
Exactly. And even though she might not have been as outspoken as some people wanted her to be,
Yeah.
her achievements and even the fact that she was able to publish at all
Yeah.
are really remarkable.
Yeah. It's a real testament to her determination and the power of her words.
And her legacy, it goes beyond just her poetry.
Right.
There are tons of institutions named in her honor, like the Phillis Wheatley YWCA in Washington, D.C.
Oh, cool.
And the Phillis Wheatley High School in Houston, Texas. Just two examples of how her memory is honored and how she continues to inspire.
It's great to see her name associated with places that empower and educate.
Right. And there are countless schools, libraries, community centers, all named after her.
Wow.
She's really become the symbol of perseverance and artistic excellence.
Yeah.
A demonstration that humans can overcome anything.
It's a reminder that her story, her voice, it resonates with us today.
Yeah.
Her life and her work are like a lens to view history and how it connects to the things we face today.
Exactly.
But we're not quite done with our deep dive yet.
No, we're not. We have one more part to this exploration.
Okay.
We're going to leave you with a thought-provoking question
Okay.
to think about as you reflect on Phillis Wheatley's amazing story.
Okay, I'm ready. So we've gone through this incredible life, from being captured in West Africa to becoming a celebrated poet in colonial America.
It's really a story that, shows how strong the human spirit is even when facing such awful circumstances.
It really does. And, makes you think critically about history and how it, is still relevant today. And it leaves us with some questions, that really challenge our understanding of her work and her legacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what questions do you have for our listeners today?
Well, think about this. What if Phillis Wheatley had been born in a different time?
Yeah.
A time where being black didn't mean you were automatically going to be a slave. What do you think she could have accomplished? What would her poetry have been like if she hadn't had to deal with a society that wanted to silence her?
That's a powerful thought. It makes you realize how much potential was lost because of the oppression she faced.
Yeah.
How many other voices have we lost because of prejudice?
It's a good reminder that history isn't just in the past. It shapes who we are and what our future will be. The legacy of slavery and the fight for equality and the power of using your voice. Those are all things we're still dealing with.
It's true. And Phillis Wheatley's story connects us to those struggles, in the past.
Yeah.
And now it reminds us that the fight for freedom, it can be through protest, but it can also be through art, through words.
Her poetry shows how important it is to use your voice no matter what outcome. Phillis found a way to make herself heard even when people tried to silence her.
Her story gives me hope. It shows the resilience of people, even in the darkest of times. Creativity and the desire to make a difference can win.
I agree. Her legacy is all about talent and resilience and the power of words. It's a story that needs to be shared and talked about, for generations to come.
I think so, too. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the life and legacy of Phillis Wheatley. But before we go, we want to remind you all to connect with us on YouTube, Instagram, and Threads. We're always putting out new content and giving you a sneak peek behind the scenes.
And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel and share this episode with everyone. Anyone who loves learning and getting inspired, help us share the joy of learning.
We also want to encourage you to check out our other episodes. We've done so many deep dives into all kinds of topics, from history and science to culture and art.
That's right. You might just find your next favorite subject.
You never know. And every like and every share, every subscription helps us reach more people, just like you. We believe learning should be fun and exciting, and we're so glad you're here with us.
Absolutely.
So until our next deep dive, keep your minds open and curious and never stop exploring. We'll see you in the next episode of the All Sorts podcast, where we'll be diving into, you'll have to wait and see.
Keep those minds sharp and those imaginations going.
And as Phillis Wheatley might say, let your words be your wings and let your spirit soar.